Good morning, everybody. This is Frank Whitmer for Ready Precision. For this actually is our usual day for Tech Tuesday, which is the first Tuesday of every month. And this is actually going to be the first now of the next few weeks of trying to do one weekly at 8 o'clock. So welcome. And our topic this week is deciphering Niagara licenses. I guess with a concentration on the CIPer 50 and how the licensing is done with that product. So I thought we'd start with what are the different elements of a Niagara license. One, everybody knows this one quite well, is the host ID, being that we just had the renewal period with April 1st last week. Hopefully everybody is up and talking and working with their tools okay now. So you have your host ID, which is the unique identifier for each machine that runs Niagara. And you won't be able to run the workstation software without having, and also the embedded platforms. You won't be able to run Niagara without having that unique host ID. So every Jace, every edge device, every Windows machine running Niagara has a unique host ID and must be licensed. As part of that, there's a certificate, and that's used to match up with a vendor ID for a public key and is digitally signed to prevent tampering. And this is located underneath the certificates folder. Of course, there's a license file, and that ends in the dot license, which will enable specific features. And it's valid for a single machine where the host ID matches and is digitally signed. So you can't go into the file and do any editing to it or render it useless. And the license files are located underneath the licenses folder. And then within each license, you will find individual entries, which are features. And they are unique items that are in the license database that are keyed to a specific vendor and a specific feature name as well. So the features in a license database, you will find that they have a vendor ID associated plus their feature name, as I mentioned on the last slide. Part of it, you'll see an expiration attribute, and at the main part of the license, that feature is the master expiration for the license. Job site supervisors, JACEs, they're all non-expirable, but you'll find on your demo licenses that you'll find an expiration date, which depending on the brand, like with Bicon and Webs, it's March 31st, and with the FX brand, it is October 31st. So Johnson Controls chose Halloween, and good old Tritium chose April Fool's Day. So I don't know if there was any real reason for them doing that, but it just so happens to fall on those days. You have various places you can actually check your licenses. Actually, there's one I didn't even put on there. Like for your PC, you just go to your licenses folder and look there. But on your machine, if you go into your console command, you can put in NRE-license, and it will come up with a, display like this here, where you just put in the NRE licenses. It'll come back and give you all the information about your license. You can go into SPY, which when you right click on your station, when you're logged into a station, under the root menu, you'll see SPY. If you go under there, and then Sys Managers, there's a license manager there as well. And you'll see that it looks just the same with all the same information. Then you also have License Manager, which you can access either from the station under the Services folder, and underneath Platform Services, you will find the License Manager there, or obviously in Platform, you can open up the licenses from there, and that's a Platform License Manager view here. And then the other place you can check is if you look at your Resource Manager, you can see some of the information in there about how your licenses set up. A big part of the licensing, and I don't think it's as big of a deal anymore, but there are still brands out there that are closed licenses, and this has to do with we call it the NICS statement, which is a Niagara Compatibility Structure. Most licenses are open anymore. Webs up until Niagara 4, they always had a closed license, and if you wanted a Jace open, you ordered the -O option and you had an open license, or we could go into a license and change it to be open. Basically what that means is there is a feature in a license, and across the bottom here I spell it out. You'll see an accept station in, accept station out, an accept workbench in, and then a workbench out, as well as the brand ID. If it's Webs, it would say Webs as the brand ID. If it was Johnson Controls, it was FAC-EXP. But basically, if it was a lockdown closed license, these asterisks are wild cards. So based on what the brand is, if it was locked down, you'd see specifically the accept workbench in and out, and you'd have Webs in there. That would mean only a workbench that had a license with accept workbench out as Webs would be able to work with it. That's why there's times you could log into a JSON, it'll come up and say you don't have the correct brand or something like that. So if it's you're looking for an open license, you're looking for these 4 fields to make sure that there's asterisks there. If they have a brand name in there, then it's a closed license. And I'm sure most of you have come across that over the years working with the product. And I'm not sure I think Comfort Point with Honeywell is probably still closed, but I'm not sure of other brands that are at this point. I don't know if anybody out there has come across any Niagara 4 closed licenses lately. A big part of the licensing, and more so with the edge devices and all those other JACEs that are out there. Part of the license where you have a controller that can be licensed for so many field devices. It can be licensed, a supervisor can be licensed for so many Niagara devices. There's a global capacity feature that's used for that. Specific resources in the station are tracked using a global counter to allow, lock down to a number of devices used on a particular platform or on a particular device. Specifically, in our case here, it would be on JACEs or edge devices. So this global capacity resource keeps track of accounts. Like on a supervisor, you're licensing based on Niagara devices. So you're basically licensing it based on the number of Niagara network connections you're making. So if you have a supervisor and you have 5 JACEs, you have to make sure you're licensed for 5 Niagara devices. And this globalist counter will keep track of how many are used and compare it to the license. Once you exceed that number, anything above what's licensed will go into default. You can delete a couple out of there, your count will not go down. It only counts up. The only way to get it to reset to count again on a lower number is to restart your station. So if you're working, it seems to be more prevalent with a supervisor where you're adding stations, JACEs to it, where you might be licensed for 3. Well, you add the 3rd, then you delete it because you wanted to do it differently. You go and add it back in. Well, you just added a 4th device because you were already at 3, you deleted it. It won't calculate it. It won't take that one away until you restart it. So if you don't restart your station, you add it back, you've got 4. And you'll have the fault saying that you've exceeded your license. You'll panic and you think you got to order something else, or really just restart your station. And then you'd be okay. Now on a JACE with field devices, same thing. You license them based on the number of devices. In Niagara 4 with the 8000s, you're licensed for Modbus, BACnet, LAN. So you're not licensing the driver, but you're licensing your number of devices. So this global capacity is what dictates how many of those devices you can have. So if we look at the example towards the bottom of the screen here, this is actually from a base model CIPer 50, and you'll see the feature global capacity. You have a section there, excluded points, and a section for excluded devices. So any devices falling under these networks are excluded from the global capacity. So if you look at this, the NRIO devices are excluded. On a Jace or on a CIPer 50, Niagara devices in your Niagara network are excluded. When you look at how many devices can you add, you've got out of the box, it comes with 6 devices. One is your local device in your Jace, so it leaves you with 5 field devices that you can work with. And you have a total of 100 points. That's what comes licensed in there. And that 100 points goes towards your PanelBus, your Onboardio, as well as your field devices. So it's a global capacity where you look to see how that is licensed. So now if we look the broader view of a license file, this one here is, this is a CIPer 50 as well. Common features among all licenses, obviously you have your expiration date. On a Jace, it's going to be never. On an edge device, it's never. The host ID will be listed there. On a on a Jace or edge device, there will be a serial number associated with it. Then the version. What this version number means, that's the highest version that you can put in, that you can load up in this machine. So if it was a 4.6 license, you couldn't put anything above 4.6 in it. If you look at any of the legacy Jaces, your 300, 600, 700s, it will only be 4.4 because those platforms can't go higher than 4.4. So they're only licensed to 4.4. Another field on there, the SMA, software maintenance agreement, the maintenance expiration date is part of the license. So you can go in there and see how that's set up. That's how your Jace knows when you log in with the browser. And if that date is expired, it's going to show up in your login screen for the end user that his software maintenance agreement has expired. And that'll show there forever until they renew that SMA. If it's not expired yet, it still shows up how much time is left on that SMA, and that can be hidden. And there's a way to do that under services. That's for a future session. But once it expires, it's not hidden. It stays on the screen. And that's done so that it catches hopefully the customer's eye that they need to do something because their software maintenance has expired. The branding, the NICS statement I mentioned on the previous slide, that's all on here as well. I mentioned the global capacity. You'll see that's part of it right here. I highlighted that. But you also see in the license, you have all the other features that are included. So if you're wondering, gee, is BACnet really included in this machine? Well, if you go down, there's your BACnet statement there. There's your BACnet feature. That would be the BACnet IP. And then if you go down and look for MSTP, which is the MSTP part, you'll see there with a port limitation of 6 ports. So you can use on a Jace, you'd use the 2 ports on board. And then you could add 2 more option cards to do your 6. And a CIPer 50, you get the 2 ports that are on there. There is no expanding of those on a 60, or on a 50. But you'll see all the others. So you've got your Modbus async slave, TCP slave, MQTT, all of the others. They're all included on this. On BACnet, one of the questions that comes up quite a bit is, well, okay, I know BACnet's included, BACnet MSTP is included. What about BACnet server? I need to serve out BACnet data. Well, if you look on a BACnet feature line, there's a export equals. So if you look on a regular Jace, if you didn't order the server portion, it would say export equals false. But in this case here, this base license shows export equals true. That means you can serve up BACnet data, so that's included. other things like SNMP. That's another, that's another driver that is included as well. Any questions on a general license? I take the silence to be no. So if we look at a CIPer 50, with its licensing, it includes CBus, LawnWorks, Modbus. Somebody say something? The drivers include CBus, LawnWorks, BACnet MSTB, BACnet IP, Modbus, SNMP. It is licensed for the Spider tool, and I'll show how you can tell whether a device is licensed for this, for a Spider tool. The CIPer 50 is not licensed for the NRIO. You cannot add a IOR 16 or IOR 34 to a CIPer 50. And then if we go back a slide, you'll see on here, NRIO is not a feature. Without that feature statement, NRIO will not work. So it is not something that's part of the CIPer 50. I think the intent there was not to include it because with the CIPer 50, you would use PanelBus and the XF 8, 21, 22, 23, 24 modules as IO. Because on a CIPer 50, you can actually go up to 2,500 physical points. That's a pretty big plant controller. The base license includes 100 global points. As I mentioned, the points are for your standard drivers as well as the onboard IO and your PanelBus, and 6 devices itself as the local device and 5 field and 5 other devices as well. With the 50 for licensing, you have options of, there's a 255 point upgrade. That is 255 points to go towards onboard IO and PanelBus. The onboard IO is 26 point fixed, but you can add PanelBus devices in 255 point chunks. So it comes with 100 that go towards that or towards BACnet devices, LAN, Modbus, whatever other field devices you have, but you can add 255 point chunks specifically for your PanelBus. If you need to add additional field devices, it's just like it is in an 8000. You can do 10 device, 500 points, 25 devices, 1250, 50 devices, 2,500 points. That's 50 points per device to add. And that is to add points for the field devices. Those points here do not go towards your onboard or your PanelBus IO. Now, breaking it down further, when we go to the license manager, usually with all the JACEs, we'll find 2 license files. On a Webs box, it'll be a Honeywell license and a Webs license. On a Vicon one, it'll be a Vicon.license and it'll be a Tritium.license and so forth. On the CIPer 50, if we look at the Honeywell.license, that's the license that has the features for Honeywell specific applications. And this is where you would look to see if Spider tool is used. So in this case, Honeywell.license is what determines whether Spider BACnet and Spider LAN are, whether they're supported for the tool in the device. So in this case, for CIPer 50, the Spider tool is included. It's listed here. As an example, if you go to a CIPer 30, you will not find those features in the Honeywell.license file because they're not supported in the CIPer 30. Then there's a new license file in here for the CIPer 50, which is called Honeywell Centraline.license, and this is specific to Centraline, the manufacturer for the CIPer 50 and and all of the PanelBus type devices. They were the manufacturer for the old XL 500, 800 product line over in Germany. So that license file actually goes through and also is what enables other features for the CIPer 50. They have a bunch of Centraline modules that can be used. Then also for being able to use the onboard IO, the PanelBus, all of that is part of this license. So it's all Honeywell specific for the Honeywell license. It's all central line specific for the central line license. Then on top of that, we have our WEBS license, which is the standard license. In there, as I mentioned in the previous slide, you have your standard features that come on every license with your the vendor, with the brand, the host ID, serial numbers, all that's part of it. You know, it's a WEBS brand, it's an open license. Open license means they can be programmed from any brand workbench. And if we go through here, you have your global capacity, and the global capacity is 100 points and 6 devices, as we mentioned earlier. If we scroll through further, you'll see, well, if we back up, whoops, not that far. This is a little touchy this morning. You'll see you have your BACnet feature in there. You know, you've got your LAN works as part of it because there is an adapter that plugs in one of the USB ports for doing LAN. Modbus, all the things I mentioned before are all part of that as well. If we look at the global capacity from within the you can go within the SPI. That's usually a place I recommend people look when they're having problems with global capacity and exceeding it. So in metrics, this would come up, and this will give you what's licensed. The limit is what's licensed for devices and points. So out of the box, it's 6 devices, 100 points. So it gives you that, plus it gives you the exclusion information. Now let's turn around, and we're gonna at this point, we're gonna add a 255 point upgrade to the CIPer 50. And again, this is to add points for your onboard and PanelBus. So when you purchase this, the update is going to include 255 points for those. So the central line license will be changed, and the original one says point limit of 100. It's going to change to 255 plus that number. That's where the 355 came from. It's the 255 we just added plus the original 100. Then in the WEBS license itself, there's a new feature that gets added. And this is where it gets this is where it changes when you're working with the CIPer 50 from any of the other chases and edge devices. It adds this driver capacity called Central Line AX EHIO. And that's where it tells the onboard panel and PanelBus what the point limit is. So this feature gets added. Then in the global capacity, you'll still see that it's showing there a limit of 100. So when you basically that 100 points, I'm trying to remember how when that support ticket that we had done with Honeywell on it, we had, it shows that there should be 355 points total because we had the original 100 with the license, as well as we added 255. Well, what it really turns out is because this capacity here is 255, we're limited to 255 points in this CIPer 50, not 355, like you thought you would have because of the original 100 that came with it. So the thing to watch out for is when you're adding IO specifically for the PanelBus, make sure you order enough, or you have enough of that to cover all of your onboard and your PanelBus IO. And an example of that is, this is a snapshot somebody took and sent to me of a CIPer 50 that we triggered this support ticket, where we added 255 point packs. So we were adding 510 points. So we were adding 510 points to, we thought, the 100 that came with it. Well, the underneath metrics and SPI, it shows that for the global points, we're at 100 with 6 devices. Yet with the PanelBus and onboard IO, we were limited to 510. So we can't So we only have 510. So even if we have no field devices and no field device points, we're limited by this number here, the 510, where you would really expect it to be 610 because it came with 100. So somewhere in the mix, 100 disappears from onboard and panel bus versus the global point count of 100 that went to those plus field devices. So it sort of breaks out that 100 and says, okay, from now on, there are field device points, not onboard IO or panel bus points.
If Frank, it's George, and Honeywell said that's how it's supposed to function.
That's how they said it functions. Yeah, we went back and forth, and I gave him a bunch of examples where if somebody had, I don't have that in front of me, but I came up with an example of where you had so many Modbus devices or BACnet devices and points in there, and you had a handful of you had your 26 onboard IO, and you had a couple of the panel bus devices. That if you went and you added 255 to it, you end up with less points available than you had before you did that upgrade, where you actually have to add two 255s to be able to use the 255, or there was something funky like that. And it really comes down to is, I guess, the way that the licensing is structured in the license server, that this was the only way that could be done. So it's a big, hey, just keep that in mind.
Basically,
so you're double paying for points.
Not really. What ends up happening, George, is that let's say you had 256 panel points. You think, well, I've already got 100, and I'm going to buy the 255. I'm only going to use one. I only need one more point essentially on top of that. Once you buy the 255, it says, all right, forget it. Every point you buy for the panel is exclusive to the panel. And those 100 original, you can't use any of those towards the panel anymore. Those would be for, if you've got BACnet devices down the trunk and they're discovering their own point. So it is, you don't lose any points, but you might lose the way you can use the points.
The way they were allocated.
Yep.
We can talk about it later. It's confusing me.
Joe, did you ever get that distribution back up? I assume you didn't, since I haven't seen it. I'd still like to see the physical layout of that and how many Modbus devices and points they had versus the number of panel bus points, just to see how that final tally worked out and be able to come up with a matrix of.
One of the things to look at, George, and this is what Frank and I worked through, was, I don't know if this is one of your screenshots, but that word in the gray under global capacity, where it says excluded points. You got the global capacity, you go down to where it says excluded devices and then excluded points. Frank highlighted that. Onboard IO.
Right, because back here, if we go back to the original license, the where was it? Global capacity, the panel bus and the onboard IO, they were excluded, but the points aren't. That's why the points originally used that original 100 points. Once they came in and you add this 255, it adds this exclusion of panel bus and onboard. So they no longer count towards global devices. So them just adding that part that's highlighted there to that license says, okay, those 100 are now for field devices. You have to go by this central line IO device capacity counter.
Don't get bothered by the fact that this is confusing. This took us a long time to figure out where did the points go until looking through this. And really it comes down to either whoever's purchasing it or whoever's selling it. Hopefully this is giving them some understanding as to, okay, what kind of points am I buying, and what am I losing if I buy these PanelBus points? Will that affect the total points that I'm trying to accomplish?
Any more questions on that?
I got sent a couple questions because I must be the Brian KE that's the host. So what happens when 4.9 releases? Does the license know it's now the latest version and it can upgrade to it?
Just like every other license that's been around, the license doesn't change in the device itself. You physically have to tell it to import license from the license server to get to the latest version. If the software maintenance agreement is up to date, the license server will give the license the latest version number when it's available, but doesn't do anything to the physical device. You have to go in and tell it to import that license. If the software maintenance agreement if it lapsed and it's expired, you're frozen at that version that as being the highest version you can load on that device.
Except for the edge devices, which don't have an SMA.
Correct.
And last question that I've got here, can a Jace MSTP feature go past 6?
No. No, that's a hard number, the 6 port limit. Doesn't matter what, on a Jace 8600, 6 has always been the limit. And really, if you're going out that far, don't do it. Just put in BACnet IP to MSTP routers. That would, to me, would be a best practice. And pull those resources out of the Jace and let them be processed by the routers.
Frank, where can somebody purchase BACnet routers from?
Verti Precision would be the best source for purchasing those. So we have customers that don't use MSTP at all to the Jace. They will just put in BACnet IP routers and work it that way. If you have a really large job, it gives you the opportunity then to pick and choose. You may want to start with one Jace, but you may say, well, you know what, I'm going to add a second one. Then you're not rewiring anything. You're just picking which network number you're working with on which Jace, and over IP, they're all connected to that same infrastructure. So you can move around your networks that way. It makes it a lot more flexible. Any other questions come in? Actually, that was perfect time.
That's all I've got. I would just add because a comment came in. When you're looking at the license version number, there's no way to know whether or not that's the latest revision of the software that's in there as the version number. So if
it shows that your maintenance agreement hasn't expired, it's going to be the latest.
If you do an import of the license.
Yeah, that's the only way you'll really know is if you try to do an import. And when you do click on import, you're not stuck to importing it. You still have another dialog box that'll pop up before it actually does it. So you can still choose to cancel out, but at least it'll come up and tell you what version's available that you could put in.
That's all I've got.
So any other questions? What's that, a question on AX end of life? Anybody have any questions on that? It has been announced. I mean, actually, it was announced back in when Niagara 4 was introduced. They announced a expiration date of it. But all those dates hold true. You see here, I mean, in February, Tritium released the last version of Niagara AX. Vicon released it then. Honeywell is close to releasing it. Johnson Controls released it on April 1st. I have downloaded, I haven't posted it to DP Tech Center, but Johnson Controls has 6.7, which is the 3.8 U5 that is released now. It's got some security things in there. I think there might be some other fixes and some cybersecurity patches as well, or part of the OS and distribution updates on that upgrade. So AX 3.8 U5. Well, unless they find some other bug or cybersecurity issue between now and July 1st of 2021, then there may be a patch, but that's frozen. That's done. AX supervisors can't be ordered after October 1st. You can order a Niagara 4 supervisor and purchase the downgrade if you really got stuck and you had to stay with AX for the time being. But July 1st of 2021 is the last time you'll be able to buy any Niagara AX licensing. And then July 1st, 2023, the license server gets shut down. It's not going to be like R2 that they went like an extra 10 years. That's probably about right. It's done in 2023. So now is the time to look to your installed base and revisit your customers and talk to them about upgrading. There are some upgrade programs available with the various brands. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing the Jace 8000 upgrade, there is a terms and conditions. And the biggest one in there is when you replace a legacy Jace with an 8000 as part of this program, within 180 days, you have to physically damage and permanently render unusable the Jace, or you could have to forfeit your discount back to Tritium. And it's a document that actually has to be signed as well for each of the brands. But the intent is when you replace the Jace, it's out of commission and it can't be used any longer. I know when they were going from art, when there were some AX upgrades, there were times that certain ones weren't put into use and then they were still in place. And then when they came around needing to do an upgrade, it's when, it's like, hey, it's been replaced. You could, it was basically it's supposed to be a dead controller. And you couldn't do anything with it. You couldn't upgrade it or anything because it was disabled because it was upgraded. So I don't think we're going to turn it away. One of the thoughts I had was, as part of this should be that it gets returned to us. We'll make sure it gets destroyed, but I think we're all big boys and girls and we can take care of that ourselves. Maybe we have a contest to see the best way to destroy a Jace 600, but that sounds like it could be dangerous too. So we'll scratch that. But anyway, there are terms and conditions and it has to be disabled and destroyed at some point. You probably have fun doing that. But that's the end of life. And I try to bring this up during the Tech Tuesdays, at least when they were once a month. I'm not going to keep bringing this up every week since we're doing this weekly now, but I just want to get it out there and get people thinking about it. It's another chance to revisit your customer and look to move ahead in the future. Any questions on that, or actually anything else too? I mean, we can, make this, open forum at this point.
Future topics for future Tech Tuesdays.
Just looking to see if there's any. Okay, it looks like all those questions were answered. All right, so if there are no other comments or questions, or even any suggestions on future topics, we can. Well, for now, I will turn off the recording. So, if there's any other questions there, we can leave this open for a couple more minutes to see if anybody thinks of anything. But that was everything I wanted to make sure we covered today. And hopefully it helped with understanding the licensing and maybe have you look differently at licensing and look at it more to understand more of what what's available on your JACEs or on your supervisors.